So everybody, I'm here with Nick. Do you go by Nick, Nicholas?
Nick is good.
All right. Of 3DMJ. If you don't know who I am, I'm Jacob Templar of Strength Guys. I do our injury management and we call it injury management and coaching. Assist the coaches in helping figure out injuries with clients or with lifters and then managing them. So I guess introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself too.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for kind of organizing this and for two of us to kind of put our heads together and have a good conversation here. Very similar to you. So, like you said, my name is Nick. I'm a doctor of physical therapy. I am the injury reduction and management specialist. That's a mouthful.
Yeah.
For 3DMJ. Um, Basically, the title is the way to say that we manage injury without saying injury prevention.
Yeah. Yep.
So it's just tiptoeing around not saying injury prevention, basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, same kind of deal. I work with 3DMJ athletes, work with the coaches, and yeah, because anytime there's any question about any pain, injury that the coaches just can't seem to work around through their programming, they reach out to me and kind of offer my assistance when needed. And a little bit about, I guess, my background. I started working out like most people. I was a teenager, got into Rocky
Hmm.
and played football and the muscle magazines and all that, and you kind of dive into that world. And at the same time as I was doing that, I went to college for biology and then physical therapy school after that. Started competing in bodybuilding in 2013. Didn't know much about the sport other than muscle and fitness and the Mr. Olympia
Hmm.
contests. So I knew that I wanted to do natural bodybuilding. I just didn't really know that was even a thing. So I kind of just dove into it. Didn't know much about it. Followed what the biggest guy in the gym said. A lot of wives' tale, a lot of misconceptions that you take for religion back then, and only to then be enlightened when you stumble upon people like those at 3DMJ.
Hmm.
I was a huge fan of them before I ever had any kind of contact with them. Um, Eric Cressy, Tony Gentilcore, all these guys were very influential in my development. I actually started writing for Tony Gentilcore. That's how I kind of
Okay.
got out there first. Tony had a baby, a son, and geez, I don't even want to know how old he is now, his son. But when he was expecting, he put out a post that kind of said, uh, you know, is anyone willing to put a guest blog on my site because
Hmm.
I'm going to be, crunched for time here with the newborn. So I said, what the
Yeah.
heck? Like, I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of people. It's like in Hitch, the movie Hitch, when like
Yeah.
she asked for a pen and everyone like puts their pens in, and he's like, well, she borrowed my pen one time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was like, what the heck? I'll throw my hat in here and see what happens. And I sent him a couple of samples of my writing, and he liked it, put them on his site, and I wrote consistently for Tony for a couple of years. And then Andrea from 3DMJ reached out to me. We kind of I tagged them in a couple posts here and there, and then she reached out to me after reading something from Tony's website. And yeah, the pinch me moment was when Andre asked me if I'd be interested in writing for them. So I did some
Hmm.
guest blogs for 3DMJ, and then eventually they kind of brought me on the team, and it's been amazing. It's been an absolute dream job to watch your idols and role models and mentors become your colleagues. And what's interesting about that whole story is that was my journey through training in bodybuilding, but it's
Hmm.
very similar to my journey through physical therapy, and I'm sure you've kind of been through a similar journey yourself. Is
Yeah.
you kind of go through school and you're taught what's in the textbooks and you taught what you have to learn to pass your licensing exam.
Hmm.
No fault to my school that they did a fantastic job, and I passed my boards and I learned a ton and had some
Yeah.
great experiences there. And you think that that's the way. You think that that's the Bible right there. And you have a couple mentors when you get out of school, and then what they teach you, you think that's it. That's the way it's the way it's done. And that's kind of how it was early in my bodybuilding career too. But then you get exposed to, people like yourself, or clinical athlete, or
Hmm.
strength guys, and barbell medicine, and you just get opened up to this whole new world that puts all your beliefs and biases in question, and you kind of have a holy crap moment where you're like, my goodness, like this is more complex than I thought.
Yeah. Where'd
Um,
you go to school?
so I went to, it used to be the University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey. So I
Okay.
started going there, and then Rutgers bought it out. So I
Okay.
graduated from Rutgers. Technically, my diploma says Rutgers, but it's just confusing when people ask me where I went to school. So
Yeah.
technically, I graduated from Rutgers, School of Health Sciences in New Jersey.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that's similar to like my journey. So I started in school, and that's where I actually, when I was in school still, found 3D MJ and like Lee Norton and everybody like that. And I learned a lot from them. So when I graduated, I kind of was like a little bit ahead of the curve. I did more powerlifting. Um, I've competed twice. Did pretty well for like what federations I competed in, but haven't competed in a very long time. Started putting out stuff. I worked with 3DMJ. I was one of Alberto's
That's right. That's
clients
right. Yeah.
for a while, for like over a year, and I still talk to him here and there. But then I had the idea of like coming up with, well, what about like injury management? I always get like power lifters and stuff, bodybuilders ask me about questions. Um, and I was talking to Ben Escrow actually at the time. Like I talked to him here and there on Instagram. And he's like, let me pitch that to Jason and let's see. And then, they kind of approached me. I had a couple of calls with Jason, and then I think it was March of 2019, they brought me on board to start doing stuff for him.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure it was like surreal for you to be actually be in it,
Yeah.
from going from spectators to now content producer, and you helping people just like, when you remember you were in their shoes. Yeah, it's amazing. And you mentioned Lane Norton, and I can't not mention Lane. I mean, he
Mm-hmm.
was on bodybuilding.com. Like I followed everything Lane put out, and yeah, it was really really fun, interesting time to come up in this stuff, because the information wasn't quite as accessible as it is now.
Yeah.
Like I didn't have an Instagram. I didn't like Facebook was used for like posting pictures of your high school friends. Like there was
Mm-hmm.
no, in my experience anyway, I could have been late to the show, but really it was bodybuilding.com and the magazines, and then
Yep.
yeah, so it's a it's a great time right now because there is so much information, but that is another problem, that there is so much
Yeah.
information. And it's like, hey, how do you know what's good, what's bad, and that's hopefully what I'm doing for some people is
Mm-hmm.
I'm helping that person who was in my position back then, um, not saying what's right or wrong, because whenever I think I know something, I always step back and say, well, I used to think I knew what I knew. You know what I mean? Like I used to think I
Yeah.
knew what was right, and then it got completely turned on its head. So I'm never too quick to say, right or wrong, or follow this, follow that, or don't listen to this, don't listen to that. So I guess my goal is to help people kind of sift through the weeds a little bit, and then become critical thinkers of their own, rather than, if it's something I say or something you say or something Eric Helms says,
Yep.
not not just take it and agree with it just because we said it or someone said
Yep.
it, but take that information and then, think about it critically and kind of make your own judgments, and ask questions, and challenge your own beliefs.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. So let's get into. I did have a few people ask me questions and stuff like that, but I mean, do you want to just go over kind of like in general? We can both talk about like how we work with the coaches and stuff like that, just to start, and then maybe we'll go into like some more specifics that people asked us. I think we
Definitely.
have a little while.
Okay, yeah, definitely. So basically, the coach at 3DMJ will connect me with their athlete. They'll give
Hmm.
me their spreadsheet of what their training looks like, their weekly split, their volume, their loads, and things like that. and I'll jump on a call with the athlete, and we'll just dive into their program, ask some questions about their hobbies outside of the gym, just get a real good idea of the person in front of me, and then we kind of develop a plan. And with weightlifters and these types of athletes in strength sport,
Mm-hmm.
once red flags are ruled out, so we don't have any numbness and tingling, we're not having like
Yep.
pain, constant throbbing, aching pain that wakes you up at night. Once we rule out these kind of red flags, for me, my approach is a very stepwise approach.
Mm-hmm.
So typically, what may happen is someone has pain and they go to a healthcare provider, and the recommendation may be to take time off, right?
Yep.
Take 4 weeks off, take 6 weeks off, and then we'll revisit it at that time. A problem with that is in those 4 to 6 weeks off, you're getting deconditioned. You're not,
Mm-hmm.
you're losing that momentum you had during training, so that the tissues may get less irritable in that time
Mm-hmm.
because you're not loading them. But
Yep.
then once you go back to the gym, where do you start? Right? It's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like trying to cover your eyes and pick on the bullseye, but then so that runs the risk of underloading it, not
Yep.
being as effective, or it runs the risk of overloading it too much and causing re-injury. Um, so the way that I like to go about it is so instead of stopping squatting, for example, for four
Yep.
weeks, we just modify the squat, right? So maybe
Mm-hmm.
we'll put once we find that provocative variable, whether it's load, whether it's volume. So maybe the pain comes on the fourth set, but sets 1, 2, and 3 feel great. Then maybe it's a volume type thing. That we cut it down to 3 sets for a time being, hang out there, and then try to progress to that last set. Maybe it's a range of motion type thing, right? So
Yeah.
maybe once that person squats, back down to 90 degrees, they feel that pain when they're in the hole. Then maybe we do a box squat and just kind of
Yeah.
limit that end range of motion. So we find what that trigger is, we modify it, and then we just load that, right? We load that,
Yep.
let the body get accustomed to that. I'm not going to dive into like pain and graded exposure. Maybe we'll get there,
Yeah.
but for right now, so we want to kind of gradually expose the body to that edge of discomfort and just keep kind of playing there until that threshold goes higher and higher, and you're able to do that movement, without pain. So the idea is that instead of starting up here, so if you're not watching, if it's just the audio, it's up at the top, and then stopping training, and then you're all the way down at the ground level, and then
Yep.
when you go back, you're trying to figure out where to go. We kind of just take one step down, and
Yep.
then load that, and then once that gets comfortable, we take one step up. Or if we take that one step down, that still doesn't do the trick, take another step, another step. But then no matter what, we know how to work right back up because we went in a stepwise fashion. So that's basically, in a nutshell, in general, my approach. Um, and none of that has anything to do with hips being misaligned or leg length
Mm-hmm.
discrepancies, or tight muscles, weak muscles. It's more just looking at the body as a whole and
Yep.
giving that person the tools to be more resilient moving forward. That's the best feedback I can get is when someone says, I was in the gym and I got this weird, new pain in my elbow or something, and I just did some modifications, like I decreased the range of motion for a week, and then it kind of felt better, and that's great. Like that's what I want to happen. I want them to be more resilient and be able to help themselves, in
Mm-hmm.
the future, and that's what it's all about. We want them to be independent, not dependent on us.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's similar to like what we go through. Typically, you'll have an athlete that maybe has something come up. A lot of the coaches might do stuff, like you said, modification and program and stuff like that. Or sometimes they'll shoot me quick questions about people, and then I'll just give them some information. But if they get down the kind of rabbit hole, so to speak, of okay, they're having like a significant issue. Maybe it's not enough to have to go see somebody. Well, what maybe are they missing? Not having like the coaching, or they're coming from a coaching eye versus like having our backgrounds. And then I'll get on the call with somebody, be like, okay, what's going on? You know, can you show me some stuff on the call? I've been trained in mechanical diagnosis and therapy, so most people call it McKenzie.
Mhm.
So like think a little bit with those things is like, okay, what maybe are there certain things you can do right now that may modify how that feels, and you can still maintain more normalized training. And then even we've worked in kind of protocols to teach some of our coaches certain things about like, you know, tendinopathies or back pain and stuff like that of like, okay, these are variables you want to consider modifying because of X, Y, and Z. And then I've written out things, so it's like less often where I'm needing to do one-on-one calls with people all the time. Hopefully, we've
Mhm.
actually seen a number of declines since longer I've been with them. So I started with like a lot more, and then now I haven't had a call probably in like I got my first one in like 2 or 3 months actually recently.
Cool.
So we kind of, you know, we're all, I would say all top coaching groups kind of do a lot of things similar. And then you have just your individual variations
Yeah.
between like things you guys like, we all like to do differently. And I think the stereotype is too, is like that 3DMJ is probably a lot, I would say like statistically, maybe a lot more bodybuilders, but you guys do have power lifters that you work with. And then we have way more power lifters, but we do have some bodybuilders that we work with.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and even there's a lot of Gen Pop in there too. People, trying
Yeah.
to make change in their life, and they want some good guidance and structure, and I like working with those types of people too. Um, it's nice because and when the difference. So I'm also the director of an outpatient orthopedic office. That's
Mm-hmm.
my full time thing that I do, and so you're seeing people off the street, post surgery, things like that. Not many of them are weightlifters or
Yeah.
that into exercise. Like they're
Uh-huh.
so it's nice to imagine someone who reaches out to the strength guys or reaches out to 3DMJ.
Mm-hmm.
If they're taking the time and effort to, if they reach out to them, they probably followed some of their stuff for quite some time. They
Yeah.
have that decent training head on their shoulders. That's a completely different conversation than someone who is sedentary and has back pain and wants me to quote unquote fix them.
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool to have those conversations with people who are intrigued and interested in learning. And because if you haven't noticed already, once I start talking about this stuff, I just keep talking and talking. So it's nice when people are receptive to it, and it's a good feeling to that doesn't just fall on deaf ears sometimes.
Yeah. That's usually how I am too. Like when I'm in the clinic, and I've gotten better at it, gauging like where like somebody how much they want and stuff
Right.
too. But yeah, I've not had many like elite athletes in the clinic. I do get some athletes, more like pediatric population. Um, but yeah, I can think of like maybe a few people where I could have them do as much as I have some of the athletes we work with do. Um, and I've worked with like even it was announced too, like, you know, I've worked with Taylor Atwood. He announced that in his coaching or his update after Worlds. Um, so there's like a big difference between what's considered like one of the best powerlifters in the world to
Right.
like who comes in for like a post-op knee replacement.
Right. Right. And yeah, I know. And that's, it's, it's tough, but it's a skill that you've developed and you're able to change yourself depending on who comes in the door.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite quotes is Bruce Lee. So he says, "Be like water," right?
Hmm.
So you you conform to whatever container you're in, but you're still water. Like
Yep.
you don't turn to Gatorade, you don't turn to orange juice. Like you're still Jacob. Like you still have your values, your principles, but you just conform yourself to better serve whoever walks in the door. And sometimes, like you're saying, it's not always easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, there have
But
been plenty of times like when I try to educate different people on what chronic pain is,
hmm
what pain is, what pain isn't, um, what an MRI is good for, what an MRI maybe isn't so good for, and I think they're engaged and I think they're paying attention, and then after my little spiel, they'll just kind of say something like as if I never said anything, and I'm just like, oh,
Yep.
this is gonna be. is going to be a long road.
Yeah. That's where it's like little bits of information sometimes. That's where like I find too is when I'm doing some of the coaching aspects, like giving somebody information in the beginning and then like conveying certain things to their coach, like after every like so many weeks and asking them how they're doing and stuff, be like, hey, I want you to give them like this kind of message or
Yeah.
things like that, because then it's easier to like long term influence them too. And the coaches know sometimes better ways to like phrase certain things that they may be more receptive to because of the relationship with them.
Right.
Especially like I feel like Alberto could like sell like ice to an Eskimo. Like he's so good with people that he's just like very good at connecting with everybody. And I suppose if you've coached for a living, like it I mean, like how it is, physical therapy, that's kind of what we do. After a while you just get good at talking with people.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's tough. It's easier in person to kind of catch
Hmm.
people's like nonverbal communication and verbal communication, and I think it's
Yeah.
harder online and through email. So that's
Yep.
really impressive for guys like Alberto to master that online and over a Skype call or through some emails. Because I know in my career I think about this a lot. How I feel like I'm always reading people. Like
Hmm.
they say, like a dog, since they can't talk, all they have to
Yep.
go on is body language and like just the way that
Yep.
they just kind of read other animals. They read us, right? They read
Yep.
us the way we walk into a room, and I think that's so important, especially considering how a lot of times the issues that people are coming to us for are multifactorial, right? It's not like
Yep.
they have a vertebrae out of alignment and we have to kind of pop it back in. It's usually multifactorial, and those listening skills and kind of reading where the conversation is going. That it's hard to teach someone that. I think it only comes with experience, and
Yeah.
I'm by no means an expert, but I've definitely gotten much better from where I started.
Yeah. So that brings us into like, so one of the questions we got was like, what is the probably the most common injuries you might see with bodybuilders or powerlifters? So what has been your experience so far?
Yeah, so for me, I've seen mostly um, lower back and knee
Hmm.
pain with
Okay.
a couple shoulder issues thrown in there. Um, but that's usually what I see: lower back, knee, and shoulder with the bodybuilding, weightlifting
Yeah.
population.
Do you notice any correlations between them? Like, is there any time like maybe between like dieting phase or like amounts of sleep somebody's getting or anything like that come up as like common threads that you see?
Definitely, all the time. Yeah. So if someone is in a digging phase of dieting, or so funny, we're talking about how important it is to ask these questions and have a conversation with someone.
Mm,
Usually, the initial intake or initial conversation may start focusing on the shoulder or focusing on the
mm-hmm.
knee, but then as we kind of dive into it a little bit, I realized that their pain started 2 to 3 months ago, and they also moved, changed jobs, and had a baby
Mm,
2 to 3 months ago.
yeah, yeah,
So I'm like, okay, well, that's good to know. Like, maybe we should focus on, prioritizing sleep or some kind of auto regulation where if you really get a bad night's sleep one night, maybe we can modify some things depending on the day. But what I'm also seeing, and I'm very, very pleased with it, is that I'm being asked those questions.
mm,
So it's normal for me to be asked by the athlete, I'm considering a mini cut. Do you think that will impact my back pain? Do you think
yeah,
that will impact my knee pain? Should I put my mini cut off? Should I do it now? So I think it's great that those questions are being asked. But yeah, to answer your question, definitely, I definitely see that correlation all the time.
yeah. Would you say you see more people that are in like Gen Pop, kind of like want better guidance for training, or the ones that are like bodybuilders that are competitors?
It's a real mix. It's a real mix. Um, uh, I mean, the amount of bodybuilders that I'll see like in peak week or like
Hmm.
4 weeks out from a show when they're really dieted down, that's going to be less frequent just because they're just not in that mode as
Yeah.
frequently as they're not.
Yep.
So most bodybuilders I'll see are either at the beginning of prep or kind of beginning to middle part of prep or the off season. Um, and the general population, it's a really good mixture. Going into this, I wasn't sure. I was actually surprised how many general population
Yeah.
athletes that 3DMJ does coach.
Yeah. I think we have definitely a huge population that are still like competitors. Um, because I just think, I don't know, maybe just the way that our services are marketed or something. But I wanted to say like we have an obscene number of people that are in like the one of the Canadian like national like levels. I forget if it's like the just plain nationals or collegiates. It's like maybe 30% of the people that are there. So it was like crazy to hear that. And I definitely have found that there's correlations between like, you know, times that they're moving or like have had like a big change in their life or sleep's not on par or a lot of times we'll see because for powerlifting, like typically I don't think most of our coaches try and let people get too far away from their weight class.
Mm.
So that way if they're going into a competition, they're maybe under or already like really close to it. So it's not like their dieting is really influencing um, their volume and everything like that and trying to peak for that competition for performance. But I definitely say there's a correlation between some people that I've seen where they've been trying to diet a little bit to get to their weight for a competition. Because with us, I mean, powerlifting, we're having more competitions per year than somebody who's a bodybuilder because you're spending more time as a bodybuilder trying to grow muscle mass
Hmm.
versus we may be just trying to add like X amount of kilos, which doesn't always take as long. And it's not, and it's a neuromuscular adaptation versus hypertrophy, which can take much longer. Um, so I'd say like, I think average is like 3 or 4 competitions per year for most people. Um, and there has been, you know, that correlation or like their sleep is off or something like that has come up. So the good thing is though, is we do have a weight cutting specialist that we use and he's actually doing his PhD under Eric.
Oh,
So,
okay.
and he's very good. Like I use him for my coaching right now and he's very accurate and he's worked with a lot of our athletes. And sometimes I'll have conversations with him about how this is going to influence somebody and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, another one of the things that I'm pleased that I'm seeing is that, and again, it's kind of like selection bias. So
Hmm.
someone who works with 3DMJ has been following 3DMJ. They've maybe
Yep.
read Eric's and Andrea's strength pyramid, so they kind of have
Yep.
an idea. But what I'm seeing is when I ask people their goals, like, are we in prep? Are we going to prep this year? Or do you want to be a compete in powerlifting? What's the goal? Sometimes they will say, well, I'm thinking of competing at some point, but I'm just not prepared yet to start a
Yeah.
prep. So I've been working with 3DMJ for a year or two and maybe going to prep, eventually. And that's
Hmm.
great. I feel like a lot of people wouldn't have that head on their shoulders to say, like, you see someone on Instagram who's shredded and who competes and you want to just jump right into your first competition. But, um, they kind of have that mindset where I want to do this the right way. I want to make this, be in this for the long term. I want to have the most success possible. So they reach out to 3DMJ way before they ever even consider stepping on the stage. So I always like seeing those athletes because then it allows me to plant the seeds in their head too earlier in their career too, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that's the harder conversation with powerlifters is because they're so used to competing at like these regular intervals at saying like, look, we need to take a step back. We gotta like, you know, either pull out of this specific competition or think about like, because there are some people that we've, you know, had these conversations with where we're like, okay, you're gonna pull out of this one competition, but it may not influence you like say on a grander scale. Like, yeah, it may make it harder to qualify, but we know you have the numbers to qualify if you compete in such and such meet anyways. Um, you know, so we'd rather take his time away and let's go to this meet and know, okay, you're going to hit your numbers and you're going to qualify for nationals or provincials or worlds or whatever it is. And because there's more of that, like, months planning versus years planning that you may see in bodybuilding, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so important because sometimes I know myself 100%. I would, and so powerlifting is that's tough because man, on show day, like you got to perform, like
Hmm.
you have to do your absolute like best, like try to hit your PR, and when you're dieted down after you've been training. Bodybuilding, yeah, like we diet down maybe more to get to a more like unhealthy level of body fat, but we at the end of the day, and posing is taxing. Like I'm not saying it's
Oh yeah.
easy, and the show day is very long, right? But we're not deadlifting, squatting, and benching on show day. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely uh, different. But for me, I know my competitive, I guess, career early on, I had the mindset where once I dieted down, so I started competing at like 165. I stepped on stage for the first time at 165 pounds. Um, Dieted down from about 180 to get there. Had no business being on stage at 165. Like I had abs, and I thought that was all it took, but like my
Hmm.
legs were not shredded or anything like that. So I kept just continuously dieting down, looking better and better. And I kept saying to myself, well, might as well strike while the iron's hot. Like I look this way now, might as well just keep going in these competitions until and my goal back then was to get first place, right, or to get a pro
Yeah.
card, which is like it's a moving target because
Hmm.
it's subjective. You could show up, in bad shape, not looking good, and if no one is next to you who can compete with you, you get first place. Whereas
Yeah.
Alberto or Eric or anyone else, or they compete. Look completely diced, but they get third place because the other two guys were, just elite athletes. So
Yep.
not only were my goals not aligned correctly, but I just kept dieting down, competing, and I was afraid to lose the progress that I made in dieting down. When my last show, I was like 129 pounds stepping on stage. I just had no strength, like very little muscle. I was shredded, but I was just like a very, very exhausted, dieted down person.
Yep.
And so then I realized, like, hey, like I need to take a good off season here and like build myself back up because I don't look like a bodybuilder. I just look like, I don't even know. I managed to get two pro cards in that time, but I had no business just continuing to compete. And it wasn't, it was right around that time when I started following 3DMJ. So it was like perfect timing for all that to happen. So I took a good off season after that. But I think that's the mindset, kind of like you're saying, is you don't want to take that time. You want to just kind of keep going and going and going. But if you kind of take a step back and look at the journey as a whole, it may make sense to skip this meet or take some more time to really get in a good spot to to get better moving forward.